now?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry.
Okay, take two. All right, so everybody can see the monument, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, like I mentioned, that's the Pennsylvania Monument. It's the largest that's in Gettysburg, and Pennsylvania being that the battle was fought in the state, they wanted to have the biggest and nicest and most prestigious monument out of any of the other companies or regiments or states, etc. But what I think is pretty cool about this is it's only like really large. And you can actually walk up steps. There's like an observation deck up towards the top where the dome is. So you can walk up a spiral staircase and get a good view of the battlefield from up there. And probably 75% of the entire battlefield itself, you can kind of see this monument off in a distance depending on where you're at. But over 35,000 Pennsylvanians served and fought in the Civil War. And if you look down below, those bronze plaques has the names of every one of them. It has every single division, every single regiment, company, officers, enlisted men, non-commissioned officers like sergeants. So there's 35,000+ names of everybody who has fought for the Union Army in Pennsylvania is on there. So you could spend a lot of time going over that and just looking at a lot of names.
I have a question.
So like I said, it's a very unique, large, grandesque monument, and like I said, you could go up top and look. It's like you could get a good view of the town and the battlefields. So of course, I'm sure if any of you guys ever make it to Gettysburg, you're gonna get a chance to see this monument. And speaking of Pennsylvania, you guys can see this gentleman here. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. This gentleman's name is John Burns. At the time, he was 79 years old, and he had fought in the War of 1812. He had fought in the Mexican-American War. And by the time the Civil War came around, he wanted to enlist. He was originally from New Jersey, and they're like, "No, buddy, you're way too old for this." But he protested and protested. So they sent him to Gettysburg and made him the constable. Does anyone know what a constable is?
Police?
No.
Okay, a constable is like a police officer or a sheriff. So back then they really didn't have police departments. Same way they really didn't have fire departments. So they put him in charge as the constable of Gettysburg. So I guess he was kind of somewhat content with that. The Battle of Gettysburg begins, and he picked up his rifle, and his actually original rifle from the War of 1812. It was an outdated flintlock, and went to go join the fighting with General Buford. And while he was on the way there, he came across a wounded Union soldier. He gave him his modern rifle and some ammunition, and then he went off. Talked to a couple different officers, and the officers were kind of like, "Okay, we're busy here. Kind of get out of our way." They sent him over like into the woods to kind of keep him out of the sun and out of trouble. But he found his way onto the battlefield, and he actually was fighting with units of the Union Army against the Confederates. And he was actually wounded several times. He was on the battlefield. He ditched his rifle and ditched his ammunition, and the Confederates actually captured him. And he was able to kind of lie and say, "Well, I was looking for help for my invalid wife," and he wasn't even married. He kind of talked his way out of it. Otherwise, the Confederates had every right to, they could look at him as a spy. He's a non-uniform combatant, which is not a good thing to be caught as. So the Confederates let him go, and then he eventually made his way back home and recuperated from his wounds. And I mentioned the other day when he mentioned Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address. Well, whenever Abraham Lincoln came to Gettysburg a few months later, he was almost like a bit of a celebrity in the country at the time for what he did. And he went, and Abraham Lincoln actually asked to meet with him. So whenever Lincoln visited Gettysburg, he got to meet him and talk to him. But there's actually a monument to him at Gettysburg as well. He was seen as a patriot. Excuse me. So sometimes you could see as an everyday citizen, dark things kind of happen, and we have to kind of react to it. He may have took a little bit of extreme, but he saw that there was this invading army coming through his town, and he was already a former veteran. So he wasn't going to just like sit still and take it. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He decided to kind of stand up for himself and his home, and do some fighting. So a lot of people in the country kind of saw him as a patriot, and we kind of see that today with a lot of people who are we don't always ask for these situations to kind of happen to us. We don't always ask for things to occur, and we're kind of stuck with certain stuff. But how we kind of respond to things can say a lot about our our own demeanor and how we handle everything. So sometimes it takes us to if we disagree with something, it's well within our right to kind of stand up and say, hey, you know what, I disagree with this, or I need to kind of do something to make my life better or my family's life better. You guys have any questions about him or the Pennsylvania Monument?
No.
Okay. We're going to move on to one last. This area of Gettysburg is known as Little Round Top. And on the second day of fighting, this is a very critical part of the battle. The Union lines were spread out very thin, and this was like the very bottom of the line. And if you can kind of see the tree line, there's another hill on the other side called Big Round Top. And that was where the Confederate forces were. So if you were a Union soldier, you're at the very end of the line, literally. So it was very critical that this regiment here protected this, or else the whole Union line would collapse. And the officer who was in charge of this was his name was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He was a college professor from Maine, and he was in charge of the 20th Maine. And it was he realized that it was their job to defend this section. So if you look to the far right, you can see a little stone marker. That's where their far right of the 20th Maine was, and probably just outside on the left is where their far left was. And then forward, you can see they built up some breastworks, some stone walls and whatnot to kind of defend their area. There was repeated attacks on this hill from Confederate forces from Florida, from Texas, from Tennessee, and it's kind of crazy just to kind of also put in the scope of how large the Battle of Gettysburg was. Here you are in the middle of Pennsylvania. You have people from Maine, 1,000 miles away, fighting people from Texas and Florida 1,000 miles away. How they end up at this little small town, it's pretty nuts. But there's charge after charge after charge, and the Union was on the verge of collapsing here, and they were almost out of ammunition. And Colonel Chamberlain came up with the idea. So, well, this is the last resort. So he ordered everybody to fix bayonets. That's a very rare and last-ditch order to be given in the military during a battle. That means that, hey, we're out of ammunition, and now we're going to be fighting hand-to-hand because that's all we have left. So in addition to having all the soldiers fix their bayonets, he had his unit charge forward, but instead of just moving forward in a line, they kind of did like what's called a pinwheel maneuver. So it's almost like a gate. When you open up a gate, one side stays still and the other one kind of sweeps across. They were able to do that with the Confederate attack, and that was the last that the Confederates were able to kind of attack their position, and he was able to hold the Union line. And again, this would go on the battle would go on for another day and a half. But his tactics earned him the Medal of Honor, and he was a national hero after this. And if you do watch the movie Gettysburg, there's a pretty big scene with him fighting on this section of Little Round Top. And the picture really doesn't do it justice, but this is like a pretty steep hill. It's on like it goes pretty steep down into like that valley, and then up another big hill on the other side. And that's a picture of him there. That's Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. So he kind of like had to make a last-minute decision. We'll do that another day. So that was like a last-ditch decision he had to make. He was kind of running out of options. So again, I think it kind of talks or shows his character of being an excellent leader. He's a very educated guy. But when the kind of brass tacks were down, he made that last decision. Hey, you know what? This is our last chance to save this line, because if we collapse, then the rest of the Union line will collapse. So it was a difficult decision to make because you're putting your soldiers' lives on the lines. With fixing bayonets, you're almost out of ammunition. But again, sometimes making that difficult decision is what you have to kind of do in life. And like I mentioned yesterday, you can make the right decisions, you can make wrong decisions, but either one is still better than making no decision at all. So, you guys have any questions about that?
No, sir.
No? Okay. All right. Well, I'll turn things back over to Mrs. Hildebrand, and I will talk to you folks later. All right.
See ya.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
See you, Tony.
Yeah.
See you, Tony.
See ya.